to my workshop and test model railway. In these rather tough economic times we're in at the moment, our hobby is rather expensive, and perhaps it's time to take a look at where we can find value for money, where we can find stock that is almost as good as what you can buy today, and how we can improve things to make the most mundane, ordinary objects that you can buy fairly cheaply rather nice to own. Back in the 1980s, Mainline became a serious player in the model railway field. They brought along locomotives that were highly detailed and with a level of detail that had seldom been seen. Now, they also started another revolution, and that was models that you would collect and put into a glass cabinet and never ever run them. And a surprising amount of mainline equipment was purchased and displayed and never seen the tracks. Now today that equipment is coming back onto the market, and it's quite common for you to be able to buy from sales, from eBay, locomotives that have never run. However, 20 plus years in a display cabinet can actually have some detrimental effects on the locomotive. The lubricant can dry up, and in particular, because the motor's never run, tarnishing can actually take place on the commutator, and the whole thing won't run very well. But the most serious thing is the lubricant. It can go solid within the gears, and unfortunately Mainline's gears are not made of brass, they're just plastic and nylon. And if you try to run one of these locomotives without checking that the lubricant hasn't dried up, you can end up with broken gears and obviously an absolute scrap locomotive. So, how do you go about it? Well, here is a nice Mainline apple green rebuilt Patriot, purchased off eBay for not a lot of money, never been used. So let's take a look at this locomotive literally as it comes out of the box. There she is, pristine. Let's take a good look now at what she's like. Well, this is a locomotive exactly as it has arrived, in its original plastic container and looking absolutely pristine. This is a tender, as you can see, top surface dust, quite well ingrained there in the coal and on the back. Typical sign of being in a cabinet for a long time. Same on the locomotive, as you can see near the whistle, dust just under the pipes there and inside the cab. Typical display properties from a long time being viewed. The all important part now, have a close look at the driving wheels, and you can quite clearly see there, apart from a little bit of tarnishing, that there doesn't appear to be any use whatsoever. I'm quite happy to say that I don't think this locomotive has ever been run. Now bear in mind that this was purchased for just over £20. The equivalent today would cost you near 100. When you look at the detail that is on this locomotive, it's hard to imagine that you could really improve on it. Okay, today we have blackened wheels, and we may have some glazing in the cab windows, but these are all things that you can simply and easily fit and do for yourself. If we're quite lucky, this lovely example of Sir Richard Turnbull will turn into a locomotive with many years of use left in it. Let's hope it does, because now we're going to take it apart. You don't need complex tools for a job like this. This multiple power fix screwdriver set was obtained for less than a tenner, and it's got all the bits in that you're going to need to take this locomotive apart. Also a pair of pliers, magnifying glass and a pair of tweezers. There's not really a lot more you need as far as the tools to take the loco apart. Apart from that, a pair of pliers of this type is always quite useful, and if you can get your hands on one of these lights like this one, very useful for having a look at items that are difficult to see. And the other tool that I always swear by is one of these, which is a little mini drill. Extremely useful tool, and certainly very helpful when you come to want to polish wheels and clean commutators and things like that. Mainline locomotives have a floating sprung loaded bogie at the front. No need to remove that, but it's always better to take the wheels out, and these do come out very easily. As you can see, they just pop out, and then once those are out, you can move the bogie to the side, and there indeed is the first screw you want to take out. So let's remove that. There we go. So that's that screw out there. The other screw on a mainline locomotive is located just behind the main driving wheels, just there. And so if we get the screwdriver into that and take that out, we can now part the chassis from the body. There we go. Put the body out of harm's way. There is your mainline chassis. Now that's part one. That's getting the body off the locomotive and getting down to the chassis. We now have to look for evidence of any problems. In the locomotive base are two screws. You can clearly see them there. If you take those out, this section of the chassis, the plastic section there, comes off and allows you to see the driving wheels, and this will give us a good indication of how lubricated the locomotive is. So we're going to take this off. Put the screws somewhere safe. Okay, the screws are removed. Now the moment of truth, and you grip the back and give it a gentle lift, and the whole of the chassis plate comes away. And there is your driving train, and we're now going to take a close look at the gears. Right, we're looking there at the main drive gear on the locomotive, and you may just be able to see a tinge of grey just there, and indeed there's grey marks in between on the end of my paintbrush is quite a solid piece of lubricant, and that's the sort of thing you've got to look for on these locomotives and try to remove as much as possible. Up to this point I'm now satisfied that our locomotive is going to be fairly alright in the driving wheel components, so a little bit of lubricant with Loco Lube EX, which is a silicone based oil that you can buy, and this is extremely long lasting and will help the loco run nice and smooth. I've lifted the driving wheels completely clear of the chassis here, so you can actually see the white deposit. On this particular loco, that amount of white deposit is not going to be a problem, and we'll simply mix in with the lubricant that we shall apply a little later on. Inside the motor housing, just there, you can see again white deposit, and again that is coagulated lubricant from when the loco was built. I'll show you how solid that is. You can clearly see it there. We put a little paintbrush in there and out it comes. And there on the end of my paintbrush is quite a solid piece of lubricant. And that's the sort of thing you've got to look for on these locomotives and try to remove as much as possible. Just a touch of lubrication now with Loco Lube EX, which you only need a very small quantity of, and this will keep the loco running nice and smooth when she gets back on the tracks. One rule of thumb when putting these chassis plates back in: the screws mount into little nylon bushes that are between the chassis split plates, and never over tighten them because you can strip the threads out. Line motors, very simple affair. Flat plastic retaining plate there, two screws holding both the brushes and the plate in place. Now the one screw goes right the way through to the plate on the other side, and therefore picking up the current from the left hand side of the loco. This screw is a short one, just goes into this plate, and that of course picks up the current from the right hand side of the loco. When you take these screws out, you have to be very careful that the brush springs don't go flying, because they are extremely small and you will have great difficulty finding them if they go on the floor. So a word of warning. You'll notice that both of these screws on here still retain their factory sealant. Let's do a close-up on that for you. The factory sealant is usually a red dye that's put over the screw, and it's a sure sign, if it's still in place, that the locomotive has never seen any maintenance in its life, because of course as soon as you take those screws out you break those seals. Make sure you have a correct fitting screwdriver, hold your finger over the brush and remove the screw. Very carefully let the brush spring push the contact up, and then remove the brush spring and put it somewhere very safe. You can now see down the bottom of the hole there the actual brush itself, and it's the case now of repeating the exercise with the other side. You'll see that that's a longer screw than on the other side. Again, very, very carefully tease the contact off. And once again you have the brush spring, put it somewhere safe. The plate is now unsecured. In theory, if I turn the loco over and just give it a gentle tap, we might find a pair of brushes. There again, we might find one. Again, take that, put it somewhere safe. Okay, you've got to get the plate off, so simply prise the plate away from the chassis with your screwdriver and it will come away, hopefully leaving you with a brush sitting on a commutator, which it has done. So there is our other brush. Now this commutator is showing all the typical signs of being stuck in a cabinet and never run. You'll notice that the three segments of the commutator are tarnished, the copper is dark, it looks unpolished, and although it's been run, which you can see from the track of the carbon brushes, which is visible, it's not really as you would expect to find a locomotive that's in use every day. The essential parts of a commutator are the three segments, and the slots between them, which I'm indicating there, should always be clean. So again, they're not clogged, another sign that the locomotive has never run. Now when you take a commutator out of a mainline locomotive, or any locomotive which uses this type of commutator, notice that there are some little Teflon washers on the end. You can see them just there. These are extremely important because they keep the spacing correct and they're part of the bearing surface with the housing that I've just removed. So it's essential that you don't lose these, and if there's two there to start with, you put two back. Sometimes you may find there's only one. It's now time to lift the commutator out, and simply grab the shaft and lift, and out she comes. And once that's out, you can then have a look at the gearing inside of the loco. Okay, this is the inside of the motor, if you like, and the primary driving gear showing there. Again, you'll notice a bit of white stuff here. This is solidified original lubricant. If I turn the wheels, you can see the gear wheel going round. Do this to check that there is no clogged lubricant sitting there that's going to cause you a problem. Not very bad at all in this particular loco. I have seen a lot worse. A little bit of a line there down the gear. Quite strange that. It's actually sort of probably where it's sat for 20 years and the lubricant has simply run in a line. So there we have a nice clean primary drive gear, which is what we want to see. Always clean the motor housing out. Cotton bud is one of the best things around. Simply get it in there and get the gunge away. So once that's done, we can take a look at a commutator, and that's what came out of the motor housing. Commutator shows absolutely no signs of any extended wear at all. You can see there's no heat marks there on the segments, and it's not in bad condition at all. I'll turn it over in a second. On the commutator face there, you can see the tarnishing that I spoke of a little bit earlier on, and all that's needed to do with this is simply to polish those segments up so they've got a nice bright surface. Having removed the Teflon washer, I'm simply going to use my little tool here with a little wire brush to brighten up the commutator. And there you go, 20 years of neglect and disuse, polished back to original. I think you'll all agree that that looks a lot better than when we started, and that commutator now will react quite well. Making sure the Teflon rings are in place, a tiny amount of Loco Lube EX on the gear and the spriget, and then it's a case of putting it back in the locomotive. Once it's back in the locomotive, it's time then to look at the brushes. This is the brushes from the loco. Now brushes have two purposes in life. One is to conduct electricity to the commutator of the locomotive and to make it work, and the other is to get lost. These things are so small that I'm afraid if they drop on the floor it's a bit of a problem, so whatever you do when you're messing with the brushes, make sure that you've got an area where you can't lose them easily. Now these are fine, these are original size, there's nothing wrong with them, but again they probably need a little bit of polishing, and what I use for this is a really worn out piece of emery paper, the finest you can possibly get, and literally just a little polish of the surface of the brush on the emery paper, and it's basically all that's needed. There you go, two brightened little brushes. Time to put them back in the motor and to see if the loco will actually run. You may have wondered why we didn't test it in the first place. We didn't find anything particularly wrong, but had there been solidified lubricant in that locomotive, we could have ruined the gears. So better to do it this way and make sure everything is clean. Clean the base plate before you put it back on, because once again crude dirt and lubricant will be there, and you don't want to really put that back. Let's face it, that's what came out. Base plate back onto the loco, and make sure that it seats in place nice and steadily. There we go. And now it's the case of replacing the brushes and springs. Put the brushes in first. Now they are fiddly, and to be quite honest, you have to be careful handling them to get them to fit properly. The second one going in. There we go. If they fall down the hole, it's always a good sign, because it means they're nice and free. Putting the springs back in, you need to take great care. My technique is to have them on a piece of wire. Put the piece of wire in the hole on top of the brush and allow the spring to fit into the aperture from the wire. With the spring in place, time to put the plate back. Do this with extreme care. Over the spring, a gentle press down and hold it in place. Then put the screw in the hole and retighten. Again, don't over tighten, make sure that the plate is properly located, and job done. Before we test the motor, just apply a tiny spot of Loco Lube X to the end of that bearing, and that completes the lubrication of the locomotive. We're ready now to apply some power. Time to test the locomotive. Apply power directly to the motor. That's the reverse, and this is forwards. Certainly doesn't look like we've got any problems there. Slightly lower current, and a much lower current. That's very good. That's very good. If the locomotive hadn't have run and there was obviously power going through the motor, you would see a spark. If your power leads are applied here, you see little sparks. The trick to get the motor to run is to remove the bottom plate, lift it off, and lift the rear drivers up away from the gear, and then apply power to the motor, because the brushes, having just been reset, may need to bed in, and sometimes a free running motor will do it a lot quicker than trying to do it with the complete wheel train attached. So that's what you do if the motor doesn't start. And our last check on the chassis is to apply power directly to the wheels and see if they respond as they should. We have no problems with that chassis. Last thing to do, apply a little bit of oil to the pony truck there and pop the wheels back in, and then the chassis is ready to go back on the locomotive. Job done. Track test is next. Nice running locomotive, and only £22. That's a bargain. And indeed, okay, we spent 30 or so minutes repairing it, but it's good now to run for quite some time. Not all mainline locomotives are the same. You won't, for instance, find many early versions of the J72 still in existence. And I'll explain now what to look for when buying second hand. If you're buying on eBay and you see a beautiful little locomotive like this and it says slight wheel adjustment needed, don't touch it unless you're an absolute expert with a shed load of spares. These locomotives in their early guise suffered from Mazak failure on the wheels, where the tyre literally came off, and latter ones had axles which cracked. And if you find the quartering is out at all on a model, avoid it unless you've got plenty of spares. They are very, very difficult to repair, if not impossible. And if you do buy a locomotive and find that the axles aren't correct, you're quite likely to end up with this. A pile of scrap. But let's look at some of the problems. This is a scrap set of wheels. As you can see, there's nothing wrong with the wheels themselves. They're absolutely perfect. But the centres, where the insulation occurs on these, will literally just pull out. The reason being that the essential piece of plastic has weakened, in some cases it cracks, and then the wheels will just turn of their own free will. There's nothing you can do about it. Super glues don't work, araldite won't work, and really and truly, unless you've got another set of wheels, don't buy a locomotive with that problem. All mainline steam locomotives have a split chassis, and it literally is two castings held together with screws, but with dividers which are made of nylon or plastic in the centre. Now, these are secured by a number of screws through the chassis, and indeed there's nothing wrong with that type of construction. However, if these become misaligned at all, then the loco will start to run extremely rough, and that is the problem with the split chassis. Bachmann used split chassis in their first locomotives after taking over the mainline range, and the problem still continued. However, as we all know, the split chassis is now history, and the more solid chassis are better to use. This is from a 460 mainline. You recognise the motor from the one we've just repaired. If you want to convert these to DCC, it's easy to insulate the motor. Simply put an insulating pad underneath the connector there with a separate wired connection, and that gives you then an isolated motor for your DCC chip. Mainline rolling stock also broke new grounds. The detail was very fine, and some of these items are still really in production today under different names. This is a nice Great Western coach, and we've added a detailed interior from one of our own LHP kits. I've also added lighting, which is very simply installed, and I'll just show you how it works. These are replacement wheel sets. They're the type where one wheel is bonded directly to the axle and the other one is insulated. All I've done is taken a small coil of copper wire, wound it round the axle on each wheel and fed it back into the inside of the coach through the bearing of the bogie. I've then done the same at this end, but using obviously the insulation on the other side, so this picks up from one rail and that one picks up from the other. Once inside, 3 5-volt bulbs are mounted in the roof, wired in series and simply connected through to the wires that come in from the bogies, and the result is a coach that's lit. But here's a little secret: by wrapping the wire in a coil round the axle, you don't have the flickering problems that you tend to get with wiper contacts. And indeed, rather like the Hornby Pullmans, the wiper contacts are quite strong and they act like brakes, whereas this has a very low resistance and hardly affects the running at all. The interior fitting kit really makes a difference to the coach. And as you can see here, as I pass the coach in front of a light, that it makes a world of difference to the plain moulded colours that you normally get. And again, it costs very little to do, a little time, and improves the product by a long way. This is a standard mainline coach from the 80s. Again, look at the level of detail that's on the coach. Even the first class stickers are visible in the windows. Quite remarkable really when you consider how long ago that this was made, that they got this incredible amount of detail on the coaches. On the other side, you'll note there, just coming into centre picture, that even the no smoking signs are there. Remarkable for the 1980s. If you don't change anything and you buy one of these coaches, you're going to get a good bargain. Even the wheels are to a reasonable profile, and to be quite honest, for what you'll pay for one of these, you would certainly pay probably 3 times for a coach today. Good value for money, 1980 style. Some nice running examples there of mainline stock, all of which I've refurbished using the simple methods that you've seen, and really good value for money compared to what you have to buy new today. And they really did make some beautiful locomotives. This London North Eastern Tang, for instance, absolutely beautiful model, taken over from the Airfix range when Mainline took on the Airfix mark, but still effectively in production today. But you'll buy one of these for probably a quarter of the price of the latest version. Let's go and look at some other money saving ideas. Okay, I've been out to a show and I've purchased a simple Hornby Dunster station kit. Second hand, but I'm told it's complete, and it's cost me just less than £10. Typical kit, manufactured for Hornby, stick-on brickwork, nice separate detailed windows, quite well made. Even some curtains for interiors if you should require to use rather bright colours, and full instructions, glazings, etc, etc. Now these kits are in fact made in West Germany by a company called Polar, and they're quite renowned for their ability to make really good kits, so I expect that this should turn out to be quite nice. Anyhow, as always with any kit, don't assume you know how things go together. Always read the instructions. There's something on there you probably don't know. So I'm not going to go through the whole construction of the kit for you, but I'm going to show you the major stages in construction and how you can improve on the original product. Right, we've got all the parts out now. A little word about tools. You don't need many tools to make kits. This particular moulding here has flash on it, and as you can see, that's got to have to be trimmed off these parts with the main walls. A good Stanley craft knife will serve you very well. Stanley ones and Stanley blades do last a lot longer than the cheap Chinese imitations. I stick everything together using plastic weld. This is a chemical called dichloromethane, or otherwise known as methylene dichloride. It evaporates very quickly, but it welds the plastic extremely well. You put it on using a simple brush. Don't go out and use your best sable brushes for this, because it does retain some of the solvent and plastic on the hairs. Just buy some cheap children's brushes that you can effectively dispose of. A pair of pliers just for gripping parts, and a small file, and that's all you need to put this kit together, apart from just a small level of skill. So let's take an approach to it and let's get started. Just one word of warning about dichloromethane, or plastic weld as it's being marketed here. This must be used in a well ventilated room. It is a hazardous chemical and should carry this X sign on the bottle, and if you breathe too much of it you could make yourself go unconscious. So do read the precautions on the bottle and make sure that the area and the place where you're working in is very, very well ventilated. These are the two main walls of the station. They've had their self-adhesive brickwork attached, as you can see, but at this point always check for any overhang. Now you can quite clearly see here that on this edge there is some overhang of the adhesive paper. With a sharp knife, simply run the knife down and trim that off. The reason being, although it doesn't look much, this will give you problems in the future when you try to fit the part together. and you don't want a piece of loose paper pushing against another part. Similarly, check the windows, and you'll find that the odd window, for instance there, has a slight problem, so we're just going to nick that off. So that can be removed easily. And again, check this one. You can clearly see there is some overhang on the windows and it needs trimming off. Once you've done that, proceed with the construction, and you'll find that the parts, for instance like window frames, will fit a lot better. With the brickwork now in place, we're going to put the window frames and the door frames in. Quite an easy process. Simply get them nicely into position, make sure they fit, turn over, and where there is a little gap here on the moulding, get your solvent and just run it into the gap. That's all you need to do, and then hold the door in position, and you'll see that within a minute or so it's firmly fixed in place and it's ready to go on to the next piece. When these are finished and the building's finished, we shall show you how to make the joints in these fake stone reliefs more obvious with a little bit of weathering, but that's for later. Another great myth is that you need lots and lots of paint to do a job. Well, you don't. This is the container which had sausages in, and I must admit the sausages were very nice, but I've also got a nice little paint mixing palette. Now it's quite simple to actually mix a paint that matches these colours, because although these mouldings look very nice, they also look very plasticky, so we want to put some texture in there with a little bit of colour wash. So let's get on to a little bit of mixing and get the right tone. So let's get on with making the stonework look nice. The idea is just to get the colour to touch the surface of the stonework. Now, it may not seem much of a lot of colour, but it gives a matte texture to the surface. When that's dry, that will look an awful lot better than the plain plastic, which is how it started out. The case of touching the surface of the stone and just putting a little bit of colour there. It's not going to reflect back as raw plastic. Having now completed the paint of the stone, just touch the odd stone here and there with slightly different shade. Nothing particularly sensational, but it just does give the impression that the stone's got a little bit more character to it. Now, no matter how clean your station staff, the bottoms of the doors and the doorways will always get a little dirty, so I think it's fair in the case of the bottoms of doors just to tint in a darker piece of stone, just to add to the character. Now, with an extremely thin mix of grey and thinners, go to the white doors and just allow the paint to go into the crevices. Very, very lightly bring the relief of the plastic moulding out. You only need a tiniest amount of grey paint in some thinners and just allow it to draw itself into the crevices of that door and allows the relief to actually show up. and that's a pretty cool way of getting detail into your model that will make the plastic mouldings just look that bit better. Very, very simple and easy technique. There you go. So there you are. Added texture, just bringing out the relief of the plastic moulding, but making it look very, very realistic. Use the same technique to drop a tiny spot of black thinners round the occasional joint in the brickwork, and again it'll pull itself in and you end up with enhanced detail. And that makes the stonework look even better. The inside of a chimney is always black, so always put black inside the top of your chimney. It's an essential thing, because you never look down on a building from above and find that you can see inside the chimneys. Again, I'm going to mix a paint for the chimneys that matches the brickwork and simply apply it in the same way that we did with the stone. Now to the chimneys. We've put the black on the inside. I'm now going to apply a brown colour wash to the exterior of the chimneys, very much in the manner of which the stonework was painted, allowing it to bring out the relief of the detail. Just pop a bit of thinners in that, make it nice and runny. And again, it's just bringing out that relief. Now when that's dry, that will make quite an attractive weathered chimney. Right, we've gone into the painting of part of the station, and indeed it looks rather nice. The stonework that's been detailed looks quite good, and the whole thing is nicely flatted off. Now we're going to do something that's not in the kit and add an extra dimension to this station. Come along and I'll show you what we're going to do. I've been a little busy on my PC creating what are indeed room interiors. Fairly simple artworks, and indeed something that you could actually draw up by hand. But each one produces this little piece of artwork, which is 50 by 90 millimeters. Now what you do with these is that, and here's one I made earlier, you curve them. You turn them into a curve. Very simple. And then you glue them behind the windows of the station, and the effect is quite realistic. Let's take a look. Looking through the windows of our waiting room, you can see that the interior appears to be detailed. There's a door as you go around, there's even a timetable on the wall. Quite good, quite realistic. And the same for the other part. You've got a door and the walls are there, and again there's a notice on the wall with a clock, and indeed, if you can just about see it there, there is indeed a ticket window. I think you can see the effect quite good there, and indeed the artwork works well. Turning it round, what you see is quite literally two curved pieces of paper on the back of the station wall, and it's as simple as that. Put some lighting behind this or above it when the structure is finished and you'll really be able to see the interior. This particular piece of artwork represents the interior of the ticket office. That will be curved and it will be set across that window there, and you'll be able to see the interior of the ticket office. This is a very, very simple way of producing an extra dimension to your building, and indeed it's not beyond anyone to sit down and maybe just sketch the interior. It just adds that much more realism in a simple, effective way. So here we have the completed front of the station now, and as you can see, all of the interior looks detailed, and indeed that's going to look rather nice when it's fully assembled. 4 different units at the back there. What we've done there is just attach them with the polystyrene glue, and we've put a bit of white paper behind that window and fuzzed that glass out there just so it makes it a little bit of contrast. Easy things to do, details that you can add, not in the instruction booklet, but there again we've got an added dimension. Okay, we're at a fairly advanced stage now with the construction of this building. Inside, as you can see, the backgrounds to add the extra dimension have been fitted. The thing to do now is to finish it off. I've already made some parts up as part of the roof, and here's the station awning. So we'll get these fixed in place and show you the next stage of the construction. Our station building is now all but complete, and here we see it fitted with 3 small lights. You can now see how well the lighting works in relation to the rooms. If I move the camera along, you'll see that we are quite literally looking around the rooms. Quite a realistic interior, although it is only curved card. I think you'll agree that's a nice finish to have achieved. But let's now take a look at some of the detailing, which is the final stage in the paintwork, where we allow some colour to bleed into such things as mortar on the chimneys. Our model is all but finished. Just a few details left now to add some little patches to colour in and to put some mortar into these chimneys. Now this is a little trick I'm going to show you that's very, very useful, and I'm sure that any modelling that you do in the future that has got detail on it, you'll probably end up using this technique. Mix up some mortar coloured paint using the heavy sediment from the bottom of a paint pot so that it's nice and thick, and then thinning it with some fine thinners. Now this is quite important. The fine thinners will give it the texture that it needs to run into the grooves of the detail. So here we go. The very watery mixture, I'm just going to touch the very, very edge of the brickwork and allow the paintwork to simply take up the moist paint. Now I think you can see there what's happening. It's been drawn into the cracks of the detail. Now that gets the mortar into the brickwork. This is the chimney at the other end of the building, and once again just going to touch paintbrush on and allow the paint to pull itself into the brickwork, and you get a stunningly realistic finish. I've turned it round now so you can see this particular side, and that we're going to do exactly the same here. Very easy. Same technique again, and this time we're just doing tiles and just putting little bits of different coloration onto the tiles. When that's dry, it'll matte out and it'll look extremely realistic. Once again, here on the tiles, just blending in on the recess, give it a slight different coloration. It just helps with that little bit more realism. Again, once that's matte, it'll be nice and blended in, and that really is the finishing touch to the model. Nothing much else to do now. Can go and have a cup of tea or something. So there we have it, a bog standard off the shelf Hornby kit, nicely made up and ready to be used on the railway. Less than a tenner, which is not bad, and only 4 colours of paint used in it. A little bit of artwork to make the interior, 3 5-volt bulbs to make a little lighting system, and you've got a building that is more than usable on any layout. So there is a cost saving exercise in getting yourself a nice station. You could buy this ready made, ready weathered, ready everything, and pay a lot of money for it, well into the sort of £25–30 range. Here is a kit, a few years old, complete, not the best kit on the market, not the worst, but look at the finished detail. It's acceptable for most layouts. So happy hunting in the kit market. And now let's take a look at another cost saving measure, which involves looking across the other side of the Atlantic. Okay, not everybody's going to immediately go to eBay USA and look for points. But I've gone to eBay's American site and I've typed in 10 remote switch track. Let's see what happens when we do a search. Here we go, 10 trains, 10 right hand brass remote switch tracks. Price $73.99. The seller is a company called the Train Outlet, and $73.99 roughly at the exchange rate it is today, it's just over £50. So that means that you're going to get from a top rated seller 10 right hand switches for about £50 on the shipping and tax. Their description is very honest and simply tells you that these are brass remote switches, new cardstock, code 100 rail, and that they include the control switch. I placed my order and 10 days later here they were. Brand new, carded stock, exactly as described. Nice switch machine at the side, the switch and its control units there, and the wiring, the whole thing. With customs duty and the cost of the shipping, these worked out at just under £9 each. Now I challenge you to go out into the UK and buy a point electrically operated with an operating switch for under £10. I think that's an absolute bargain, and I have used these on my own railway extensively. So I was shopping on eBay International. There's bargains to be had, and these weren't the only things that I purchased. I purchased some nickel silver track, again model power, slightly more expensive, but very well put together and extremely good. And if you keep hunting, the bargains are there. That's another one the same. Again, from the model power range, a little bit more expensive. Hasn't got the motor switch on it, but that is a Roco point, and those are quite expensive, as you probably know. But again, it was purchased electrically operated point for under £12. And how about this for a bargain? A complete double slip remote control, the whole works. Again, Roco, and by a company called HM, not a company that is known in the UK, but all that for £19. What a bargain. So you can make a decent layout. You can buy your track from America. It's all code on 100. It's going to match up with Hornby, Lima, Pico, anything you want. And with electrically operated points at under £9, you can go fairly extensive in your track diagram. Finally, background scenery. Lovely model of the Thatcher's Inn. Absolutely exquisitely painted, and I think you'd agree that would look rather nice in the background of any double O layout. Even got a pub yard there with somewhere to sit and have your pint. These are not railway models. They're out of the series that was known and is Lilliput Lane. Very often second-hand boot sales, semi-antique fairs, curio collectibles, charity events. You'll find these for £3 or £4 sometimes, and maybe a slight bit of damage on them, but they can add really realistic scenery to your layout. Imagine building that into your baseboard, cutting out the bevel here and keeping it level. That would be a really nice addition at the back of a station or something. So don't ignore things like this. They've made a plaster, but they're very close, if not 4mm scale. And certainly, if I wanted a quick and easy pub, rather than spending a fortune, if I could find that in a second-hand sale, which I did, I'd be happy to purchase that and put it on my layout. Well, thank you very much for buying the DVD and joining me on this little adventure of thinking outside the box, so to speak, and making simple, inexpensive items into something that you can, one, be proud of, and secondly, are much different and with added value compared to what you would have had in the first place. Model railways are an expensive hobby, there's no question about it. If you want the best, you'll pay a lot of money, but you can get something quite reasonable from just a few pounds. And as we saw, we started off with a very nice locomotive that now runs magnificently. We have a nice station building to put somewhere, and just by keeping your eyes open and looking on the internet, you can find bargains and build yourself an enjoyable layout. And I think that's what it's all about, enjoyment at the end of the day. If we can enjoy what we make and what we do, then I think we've achieved our goal. But now let's finish the film by taking a look at the magnificent Stafford Model Railway Exhibition that was held in 2011. I'm sure some of the layouts on these boards will inspire you to go out and think big as to what you can do with your resources. So, come on, let's go to Stafford.
measuring